So, John, I'm going to go with you. Give us your headline assessment of where we are.
Well, headline number one is that the results confirm that the Conservatives are in deep electoral trouble. When we took the detailed voting figures that the BBC collected in 45 local authorities, we estimated that probably if the whole country had had the chance to vote in local elections on Thursday, the Conservatives would have got about 26% of the vote, which isn't quite the lowest number ever, but it's not far off it. Secondly, certainly the Labour Party is further ahead of the Conservatives than they have been in any previous set of local elections, again on this same measure. But number three, what the Labour Party might be, I think, niggled, annoyed, and perhaps to some degree disappointed about, is that its share of the vote again on this measure was no higher than it was last year, no discernible progress of Labour itself making progress. And indeed also, the Labour spokesman talked a great deal about all the parliamentary constituencies that the Labour Party would have picked up, all of which is true. But actually, when you look at the innards of that, what you discover is that the reason why that's true is not because the Labour vote on average is higher in the local elections than it was in the parliamentary election back in December 2019, but simply that the Conservative vote is nearly 20 points lower. So I think, the question that I think to sum that up, there is clearly deep disenchantment about the government, but it's not entirely clear that there's enthusiasm for Labour.
Although, is it fair to say that if you look at the way the figures are going, there's a strong chance Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister, either with a majority that we don't know, again, that's, it's not in the bag yet, or in some kind of hung parliament?
Oh, yeah, no, sure. If you're simply asking what are the odds of Keir Starmer forming the next government, then the answer is the odds are extremely good indeed. But of course, that wasn't quite what the Labour Party were claiming. They used the clever phrase that the results showed that the party was, quote, on course, unquote, to win an overall majority, which could mean that you think you are already doing sufficiently well to win an overall majority, or it could mean that you think you're making sufficient progress, that if you continue to make progress, that you would win an overall majority. And that gave them a fair degree of opportunity. I think the truth is, I think I've found at least four ways of trying to take these results and calculate whether or not they do necessarily point to an overall majority. And kind of two of them suggest that they don't, and two of them suggest they do. And I think the truth is, given that people don't vote in local elections in the same way as they do in a general election, not least with respect to being much more willing to vote for the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, that probably, we should be very, very careful about drawing inferences from results to what might happen in general elections, certainly now, and probably even more so about trying to suggest that this does or doesn't demonstrate something about an event that is still 18 months away.
And of course, these results didn't take into account Scotland, and that is going to be very interesting to see what happens in Scotland. Peter, do you broadly agree with what Sir John says? What other observations have you got?
I agree absolutely with John. In fact, I would never dare to disagree with John because his statistics are always better than mine, almost always. You mentioned Scotland just now. What we're seeing is a further stage of a process where Britain is now, the electoral contest in Britain operates in three bands. You mentioned Scotland. There it is essentially Labour versus the SNP.
Yeah.
Then if you take the northern half of Britain, from the Midlands as well upwards, that is where most of the councils that Labour took control on Thursday, they're mostly the northern half of England. So it's principally a Labour Conservative battle. Then you've got the southern half of England, especially outside London. That's where the Liberal Democrats gained control of most of the councils that they picked up on Thursday. So I agree with John that very likely that Keir Starmer will end up as Prime Minister, but it's partly because the Tories are now fighting defence on two completely different fronts, against Labour in the urban marginals and against the Lib Dems in the so-called blue wall, whereas Labour is now on the advance in two areas, against the Conservatives in the northern half of England and probably against the SNP in Scotland. Add those things all together, And I think it's pretty grim for the Conservatives, though I agree with John, it's by no means certain that Labour is at the moment heading for an outright overall majority.
Yeah, we should just remind ourselves, though, Aisha, that again, the other reason why Sir Keir Starmer is well placed to form the next administration has nothing to do with Labour's electoral prospects and everything to do with the fact that the Conservatives don't have any friends inside the House of Commons, and that basically neither the Liberal Democrats nor the SNP, who are the two principal third parties in the House of Commons, are willing to help to sustain a minority Conservative administration. And that, again, means Labour don't even have to be the largest party for Sir Keir Starmer to become the next Prime Minister.
And I think
that's absolutely right. I mean, if you like, the macro question of the next election is, will there be more pro-Conservative MPs or anti-Conservative MPs in the new Parliament? Well, the Conservatives will only possibly have a handful of Democratic Unionists to side with. So the Conservatives need at least 315 MPs in order for there to be a pro-Conservative majority. You could have an anti-Conservative majority, which Labour's only maybe 250 or 260 MPs. But as long as there's an anti-Conservative majority overall in the new Parliament, Keir Starmer is Prime Minister.
So, and I think it's really important to make the points that, Labour, any claims that this is in the bag for Labour with a thumping majority, be very wary of those claims. You just have to look back at electoral history. And I've certainly got the scars on my back from that. But is it fair to say that in terms of what we can tell from these elections, that change is going to come to this country in the sense that after 13 years of a Conservative government, that is probably going to change at the next general election, John Curtis?
Well, yes, unless the Tories can turn around perceptions of themselves. I mean, one of the things for the Conservatives to worry about is that it isn't just simply a question of Tory voters staying at home and that perhaps they'll all come flooding back, about which there's been a lot of speculation as far as the opinion polls are concerned. Certainly what you see, so far as the local elections are concerned, it isn't the case that turnout fell more heavily in strongly Conservative areas than it did in strongly Labour ones, which of course is also relevant to the debate about voter ID. But it also isn't the case that the Conservatives did worse where the turnout fell most. So neither of the things you would expect to find in the pattern of local elections, if indeed it was a question of Conservative voters staying at home, is true. So I think the honest truth is that, and also given that support for the Conservatives fell particularly amongst in wards with relatively older age profile, and of course that's meant to be core Conservative territory, given that Conservative support fell rather more in areas that voted Leave back in 2016. No, the truth is that it's not just that the election is disenchanted, but you can see the coalition that Boris Johnson put together in 2019 unraveling. And the challenge for Rishi Sunak isn't just simply demonstrating competence that might just simply get rid of the disenchantment. He's, I think, got to recreate a coalition of enthusiasm, which either means putting Boris Johnson's coalition back together or creating his own.
Okay. And Peter, very briefly, if you will, one of the lines that is emerging from the sort of spin of the results is a sort of Conservative line is, yes, it does look like Keir Starmer it has got a chance of becoming Prime Minister, but it's going to be a coalition of chaos. It's going to be a deal with the SNP. What do you think about that? Is Labour going to have to do a deal with the SNP or the Liberal Democrats, or could they just go it alone?
Very short answer, no. Slightly longer answer. If Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister, the head of a minority government, he will have the power that Prime Ministers used to have, but was briefly lost when we had a fixed-term Parliament Act. He will have the power to call a second election if he gets into trouble. That power will certainly frighten the Conservatives and will frighten the SNP and the Liberal Democrats. And since he has that power, if you like, to frighten the other parties, a minority Labour government, even if it's the second largest party, will probably be able to carry on quite comfortably for at least a few months. And then from Keir Starmer's point of view, hopefully demonstrate with reforms of the health service and social policies, whatever, that he can go back to the country, as Samuel Wilson did twice after narrow victories, and get a proper majority. But there will be no deals. I'm not sure I put money on the result of the next election, I would put money on there being no deals with the SNP or Lib Dems of a formal nature.